think it was 1956. He was out at White Sands Missile Range where the first atomic bomb was detonated. And there have been all these ET craft zipping around. And at one point he drove out because one came in on radar and went down out in a remote area of the range. And he drove out there in his Jeep, and there was a ET craft there, and it would be solid, and then it would dematerialize and look like a heat wave, like a mirage, and an ET appeared outside of it. What happened is that the ET basically was saying, would you please stop targeting us? And Colonel Corso, being a brash young Air Force guy, Colonel goes, what's in it for me? And the ET says, a new world, if you can take it. One of the things that we've been doing just leading up to this, for those of you who are new to the Disclosure Project, I just want to introduce what we've been doing for the last 34 years. I was a young medical emergency and trauma doctor when I started this project, and it's evolved. And a little bit of background might be helpful for you guys. When I first started it, the intent was to initiate a program where humans would make contact with these civilizations that are non-human who are visiting here in a context of peace and to advance the relationships between humans and these other life forms, what's now called NHI or non-human intelligence. Within about a year or two, I was approached by people in the intelligence community and the U.S. government about the problem, and some of them were hostile to what we were doing for reasons we'll unpack in subsequent episodes, and some were wanting to help. And so in the early years of the Clinton administration, I was asked to brief the incoming director of the CIA for President Bill Clinton, and that subsequently led to a number of things you're going to hear about with initiatives that began then and are now, ironically, going full circle and culminating now this week and in the months to follow. So that is how I got involved with this. Eventually, it overtook my medical career. And those of you who've seen the documentaries, Unacknowledged, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, the Lost Century, and others, and those are all available for free on various streaming sites for you to look at to get context. You'll know there's been a long trajectory of working on this, and I've been dealing with, most recently, Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committee and key people in the U.S. government as well as foreign governments to prepare them for this disclosure that's now happening. The team that will be coming forward we'll get to in a moment. I just want to give everyone sort of a good background context of how we got from there to here. And so it's a big story, 34 years of work. Now, one thing all of you can go to is you go to dpiarchive.com, which has the entire Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive up there. It's 34 years of evidence material, hundreds of top secret whistleblowers. It gives you the location of 150 plus sites where UFO and UAP activity has been going. Some of them are key black sites that are that we've mapped, and all of that information is from some of the over 700 whistleblowers that I have debriefed over the years, and where we've gathered intelligence and information. So the Disclosure Project has become, ironically, the biggest repository of intelligence and information on this subject, and exceeds what the Senate Intelligence and key people in the Pentagon have who are not in those illegally run programs. I want to emphasize that there are two governments dealing with this. There's the constitutional government. Most of the people in that government have no idea what's going on. And I can say that with authority because I'm one of the only people you'll ever meet who has briefed people at that level of government since 1993, when I briefed the incoming President Clinton's CI director. Then, the other part of it is in Congress, or most people in Congress, they know nothing about the subject, even if they're on key oversight committees. So this has been something that was a shock to me. It's going to be a shock to you. It's going to be a shock to the world and the American public to find out that the constitutional government in the United States since the late 1950s have been basically pushed aside. and relegated to irrelevance, frankly, on this issue since the late Eisenhower years. And so this whole history we will unpack over a series of these episodes, because it's very important to understand the context of how we got from there to here. But importantly, right now, the crisis of the moment is that there are a number of people coming forward from various black sites, which are highly classified, illegally run operations in intelligence, military, and corporate programs. And those guys that I've been meeting with for about almost 2 years now, 20 months, have decided to come forward publicly, identify themselves, and in a controlled release begin to give the information to the American people and the U.S. government. So this is a very complex program. It's now coming to a sort of a crescendo, and this is why I think we need to be talking with each other every week or so. The biggest part of this story isn't the extraterrestrial part of it, ironically. That's secondary. And in fact, people who have been in these covert programs that are very disinformation oriented have wanted the public to believe we're not alone, but that there's a threat from outer space. And most of you who are familiar with my work know what Werner von Braun, through his spokesperson for the last 5 years of his life, Carol Rosin, said when he was dying, and in 1974 said the whole purpose of these covert programs, one of the big overarching purposes, is to be able to hoax a attack or an alien threat and present the extraterrestrial presence as a threat so that they could consolidate military power, industrial power, and also pivot the population through fear into realizing there's another enemy to fight. Now, when you're doing that, it's a long-term psychological warfare operation, a psyop. And the best way to do that is once they figured out and reverse engineered the extraterrestrial vehicles, the NHI craft, as they're calling them now, non-human intelligence craft. Those then began to be deployed in the late 1950s into operational craft that look like a UFO. For most people in the lay public, they're indistinguishable from a vehicle. And those have been used in deceptive operations known as false flag operations. And these include everything that's in the pop culture on the subject, human abductions by aliens, mutilations of cattle and humans, and all kinds of skullduggery. Now, we can prove, if you go to our archive, that this has been a CIA psyop for many, many decades. If you look at the Lost Century and some of the other documentaries we've done, we put that evidence in there. I'm not going to unpack all that right now. But the big story has always been the technology, because without the technology, they couldn't hoax the threat, which is completely false. Anybody with any understanding of this, and even members of Congress are saying this now, like Congressman Burchett and others, that if they were hostile, we would have been totally obliterated by now because of what we've been doing. And as soon as we detonated the first atomic weapons. So the real issue becomes, if they were hostile, what are we still doing? You know, and why are we still here targeting them and knocking them out of the sky? And we'll get into this in a moment. It's because they're not hostile. They're here to help us and understand us, but they're waiting for us, humans, to grow up to a level of evolution where we can live peacefully on the planet, become a planet using advanced technology, i.e. not fossil fuels or solar or what have you, but very advanced technologies in physics, and then join them out in space eventually in an interplanetary society over the long haul, over hundreds and thousands of years. That's their objective. Now, the objective of covert programs has been to attack these objects, seize them, study how they work, what's called reverse engineering, where you take something and you take it apart, and you study it and study it and study it, figure out how it works, and then rebuild it to the best of your ability. Those reverse engineering programs started in the 1940s, and they hit really major pay dirt, let's say, results in October of 1954 when they mastered gravity control. We have that information from the top scientists at the Naval Research Labs, the biggest Department of Defense labs in the world, who saw that document in, quote, the vault some years ago in the 1990s and informed us about that. So I think most of the problems we're going to run into with disclosure is that neither the president nor the Congress nor the general public and media understand what the technologies are that have been figured out already that can be used in deceptive and, you know, malicious ways. So I think this is why we have to have this conversation now, because those systems, not only have they already been used to create the specter of a danger from outer space, and never mind Hollywood and the media and everything ufological being very terrifying to the general public. But I think that with this coming out, there's a big risk that they will start hitting buttons to make more and more false flag operations happen. And the only way they can get away with that is by the populace and our leaders being tricked. And the only way you can prevent people from being tricked is having the knowledge, the facts of what we actually have. So that's what I want to talk about for just a moment. Now, imagine this, just put this in your paradigm. The week that the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, the fabled director of that, Ben Rich, was passing away, he told a member of our team and a friend of mine, James Goodall, a very well-known aerospace historian, that we had figured all this out. And this is now 1995, so this is 30 years ago. And he says, anything you can imagine and anything you've seen on Star Trek, we already have, and it's not at Area 51, it's out there in the desert with the Lockheed Skunk Works. Now, I've been at that facility, and I've been there in the last 15 months. So what he was saying was that we have figured this out, but the folks who have, let's say, an overarching desire to control the population through fear, through endless war, through control of the energy sector, this is key, they don't want the full truth out, they want part of the truth out. And they want the part that redounds to their benefit, that serves their agenda. This is why in 1999, I wrote a paper, which you can see on our website, drstephengreer.com, that states that this is the disclosure that serves secrecy. And the disclosure of this subject that serves the secret agenda, which is what that means, is a disclosure that would present a threat and where they could hoax a threat, and then that causes the world to unite sort of around a dystopic totalitarian military response, like the movie Independence Day. Go look at that. That's right out of CIA scripting, against the ETs. So now, how could they do that? They couldn't pull that off if they hadn't figured out how these objects work. I will tell you that from 1995 to now, the man-made craft, they're called ATs, advanced technology, or ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles. They're used interchangeably. The euphemism used actually in the aerospace industry is just AT, an advanced technology, which of course is vague deliberately. And those craft at this point are, to even very trained eyes, virtually indistinguishable from an extraterrestrial vehicle or craft. So though that creates a big problem, because if we do not get those powerful interests under some kind of safe and peaceful control of those technologies, then those can be unleashed to stage, hoax, all kinds of problems on a number of fronts. So whatever you think, remember this, in context of the recent drone events, all kinds of events that have been happening, whatever you think humans have in these deep black programs, these illegal black programs, it's more and it's worse. Now, the good news, now let's talk about the other side of that coin. The good news is that a controlled and safe release of that information and technology, which is the objective of this group of defectors and whistleblowers coming out in the next couple of days, is that we could transform the world economy and civilization to where we reach what's called a level 1 civilization that Michikaku talked about, where we're no longer damaging the environment. Within 20 years, there's no poverty on the planet. There's this big leap forward for all of humanity, not just the United States, but the United States would obviously lead that because we're the largest military and economic power on the planet. And it would also clean the environment. Visualize, if you will, like during COVID, when no one was going anywhere. And there were mountains in urban areas in the distance that you couldn't see for decades, and they were crystal clear because nobody was driving and there was no industrial output. But imagine full advanced technological civilization, but you have this wonderful technology that's pulling energy out of the fabric of the space around an object, what's called the quantum vacuum or 0-point energy field. And that technology is safely deployed to run the planet, to run your house, to run your car, to run African villages, to run villages in the rainforest in the Amazon so they don't have to cut down the forest to make charcoal to cook their food. This would be, within 20 years, the biggest advancement in human history, in known recorded human history. Way more. There's nothing that comes close. But that's why it's also secret. In other words, what I've been told by people in the national security apparatus who've been on the side of keeping this secret, and I've had many meetings like that, is that it's too good. And what that means is it's disruptive. You know, the internet was disruptive. Horse and buggies, were eliminated by cars and engines. Typewriters were replaced by keyboards and computer systems. There will be winners and there will be losers. But the real winner is all of humanity and the earth herself, because we'll have a sustainable civilization within our, well, I'm no just spring chicken, but perhaps even within my lifetime, where it won't even resemble the way the world is today. So it's a very forward-looking, positive event happening. But there are also these landmines out there. In other words, very powerful interests who don't want to have us go into that future could start disrupting that future. What I realize is that the constitutional government of we the people, its president, most of its elected officials, except for a few devils that are in there who are on the payroll of this covert group, really know nothing about the subject. In fact, I would say that all of you who've seen the documentary Unacknowledged knows more than most of the members of Congress and most people in the White House on this subject. And that is a tragedy, and it's dangerous. So the organization that deals with this is not just US. It is actually a transnational criminal organization that's highly covert. And that is a fact. Not a conspiracy theory, is a fact, can be proven in any court of law. And I want to remind people, one of our early disclosure project witnesses who appeared at the National Press Club in 2001, almost 24 years ago, right before 9/11, is a man named Carl Wolf, who is since deceased. But he, in 1968, was at Langley Air Force Base at a national security agency compartmented operation, where they were analyzing the early digital images coming back from the moon, from the lunar orbiter that went around the moon to map it before we landed a year later in '69. And he was called in to repair some equipment in this compartmented operation. He walks in, and you look at his testimony. It's up on our archive, our website, dpiarchive.com. And he says it was like a United Nations. It was people from all over the world in there, China, other countries that you'd say, oh, those are our enemies. No, they were in a compartmented operation dealing with this. That was 1968. That was, how many years is that now? A long time. So, going on 60 years, 57 years ago almost. And so when you think about that, extrapolate that data point from that whistleblower. And I've heard this from many others. And what you have to realize is that the organization running this is not only US, it's dispersed around the world and is embedded. It's a bit like a metastatic cancer that's gone through the whole body politic of the world, and have enough technologies and power and money and influence to maintain a corrupt enterprise. So this is why no president or Congress has been able to get this under control up till now. And the good news is that there are a number of people in those operations who want to come out. They want to defect. But it's by no means over. And this is why another part of what we've been doing, and I mean, this is in this, well, it's a big tome, but this is the new briefing document for the incoming administration in Congress. And it's the biggest one I've done. I've done them since Clinton in the 90s. But in it, there are a series of executive orders and for the president and recommendations to the Congress. And also there are versions of this for other heads of state elsewhere that we're briefing. And in it, it very clearly recommends that there needs to be a law enforcement operation stood up that gets these programs, at least the most malignant ones of them, on a leash and gets them under control, because the technologies that they have are so advanced that when they are used maliciously, and they have been already in many ways that we'll go into maybe another time, that it's a threat to national security, but also global security. And this is something that can't continue, because the technology arc from the 40s to now, it was gradual, and then it went like this. And it continues to go nonlinear, exponential. And this is not things that you're going to see, you know, at MIT and Harvard. These are in covert programs, engineering and science programs that are deeply secretive. And those technologies, when they're used for good, could be of extraordinary value. As a medical doctor, I know of ones that would be incredibly valuable for healing and for emergencies and for fixing very chronic problems as well as acute traumatic issues. But at the same time, those technologies have applications that would save the biosphere and eliminate poverty and pollution. But that same technology can be used as a weapon, right? So all technology is a double-edged sword. And what it is who is wielding it? Who is controlling how it's used? Who is determining? What is the consciousness and the motivations of the people who wield that technology, who have it? And that gets into almost an existential question, isn't it? Spiritually, not necessarily religiously, but what is the consciousness of the people who have that technology? Are they hell-bent on destruction and endless war? Or do they want a world of peace and of universal peace on earth and in the heavens? You know, so this becomes really dispositive, you know, a deterministic of how the outcome of this whole endeavor that's been going on for so long will turn out. And so what has to happen, though, we cannot whistle past this graveyard. So there is a separate team of people, and I've checked with them. I'm okay to say what I'm about to tell you. And what I'm about to tell you is it's explosive and sensitive, as if all of this isn't. But there's a special access project, top secret, special compartmented information, that's under a law enforcement entity that has been, we've been briefing the person who's been asked to direct that for about 20 months now, and also his senior operators. And these are guys who've been Green Berets, special forces, who separated from the military now and are prepared under executive order to go forward and get the most sensitive and damaging aspects of these illegal covert operations under control here in the United States. They also have a plan to do it, what's called OCONUS, outside the continental United States. CONUS is continental United States. OCONUS is outside continental United States. So that they have been asked to do that, but they have not yet gotten the funding and the go to do it. Now, with what's coming out this week and in the subsequent weeks and months, because this is going to be a gradual release over the next few months, that urgently needs to happen. It absolutely, and this is in the executive orders for the incoming president, the current president, and the Congress. Ironically, if you go into our archive, you'll see those same recommendations were made to Bill Clinton 30 years ago. So, it's kind of, for me, we won't get in what it's been like for me, but yeah, a long, mind-blowing and frustrating and death-defying journey. But at this point, we're at this inflection point where all that can get resolved, because there are enough people. There's been a generational change. There are enough people in the mid to upper levels of these covert programs that want out. They want it to, let's call it they're calling these legacy programs, the old operations from the 40s till now. They want out of that, and they want a pathway out. And this is why that operation, we're hoping, will not have the hardliners prevail, but will have the moderate and intelligent people who are looking forward in a positive way prevail. If that happens, it's a new world. And if it doesn't happen, it could be very dangerous. So the stakes here cannot be overstated. I'm not trying to be frightening to people, but it cannot be overstated. Now, the good news is that there is a kind of a critical mass of people coming forward who want to see that happen. The bad news is that the constitutional leaders who are elected and appointed don't have enough information, and they don't have enough detail to make these assessments. We're offering to do that and help them with this. It's also why this team of guys who are defecting, who dealt with this very up front, and at a high level. The lead guy I've been dealing with has been involved since 1995, almost 30 years, as a young special forces guy, and now he's high up in there. So we're wanting to help the governments here and around the world come together and figure out a path forward that is peaceful and is a transformation rather than a conflict. So that's our objective. And by the way, this is why, if you go all the way back to the Clinton era, I had recommended a period of amnesty for people who've been involved in these programs. And even though there have been some horrific things done, that if people come forward and they actually come clean and are agree to make a new chapter happen, that's a beautiful development for humanity, that they have amnesty extended to them. Now, those of you who have followed the minutia of this, about a year ago in late December of 2023, the National Defense Authorization Act, which had a provision for safe harbor, which is amnesty for these kinds of figures, was passed unanimously by the Senate the day after our June or early July, no, it was June 2023 National Press Club event. They passed that, and I had helped people there that I was working with put the right language in that Senate amendment to the Defense Authorization Act, and that got passed overwhelmingly by the Senate, but it was ripped apart in the House of Representatives by just a handful of bad actors who I'm pretty certain are in the back pocket of these legacy covert and rather disturbing programs. We know who they are, and we're watching that very carefully. But that means that at this point, you're going to need to revisit that in the Congress and also in the White House, because this can be extended through the Department of Justice through immunities and other mechanisms in the executive branch, and it can also be done by revisiting this in the Congress, which I've been told in meetings with folks attached to the senior folks attached to the Senate Intelligence Committee or part of that operation, that they are going to pursue that again. But the reason that's important is that, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. What we all want, including my friends who are coming forward, they're like brothers in arms, as it were, coming forward with all this information. We really want this to be a positive, transformative event and not a conflict. And that is very well within the possibility now. But there are certain things that we, the people, need to ask our government to do, whether it's Congress or the president. And there's a new president. By the way, I am not a partisan. I have dealt with every administration and both sides of the aisle since 1992 and 93. So just to be clear, this project is it's global and it's nonpartisan. But we deal with whoever is the office of the president, the presidency, but also whoever's in Congress and whoever's in charge of the key oversight committees. And that changes with each election. Okay, so which is the way democracy works, is fine. Now, the bigger issue is if this isn't started very quickly, and this is my biggest worry right now, is that there can be no foot dragging about standing up that operation and getting these swords, these very super high-tech swords that are in covert, illegally run programs, turn into plowshares. And the ones that stay as swords need to be monitored and put on a very short leash. That has not happened. And because there is no legal controlling authority, let's say, constitutionally here or in Great Britain or in other countries where I've been, Australia, where I've met with their Minister of Defense, et cetera, that have knowledge of this or control over it. So that is actually a big threat to world and national security. The biggest part of the threat is that we continue to use very advanced directional energy weapons, electromagnetic pulse weapons like you have from an atomic bomb that are turned into a signal that has embedded within a scalar, what Tesla call a scalar signal, which is faster than the speed of light. We target these extraterrestrial vehicles or NHI craft, and then we bring them in through mechanisms we can talk about in another podcast and hit them and disable them and bring them down. Sometimes they're brought down intact. Sometimes they're blown to smithereens. And the people coming forward have dealt directly operationally with those strikes and with the targeting and downing of these extraterrestrial vehicles. In fact, when I was in this gentleman, our code name right now until he comes out in the next few hours and days is the Knock, because he's a non-official cover guy, NOC. When I went out to his sites last year, right before I was critically injured, we and the director of this strike team, law enforcement team, Green Beret, were in his chopper, and we flew over two of these black sites that he's over and involved with. And at one of them, as we were flying around that side in the opening, the underground opening, where the man-made craft come up that look like UFOs and are tested over this range. And we have all these photos and videos, by the way, and they're in our archives. Care to look at them. He said that one or two ET craft a year, even now, are targeted and downed over that one site. Now, remember, there are sites like this all over the world, not just the United States. So what does that mean? That means that while there's no evidence that these civilizations visiting us are hostile, they are certainly concerned about our hostility. And the only question is the patience and largesse that have been shown to us as an evolving younger brothers and sisters in the cosmos. How much longer will that patience last when our technologies, by studying theirs, the extraterrestrial technologies, become more and more powerful and more dangerous and accurate, and we're using it against the extraterrestrial peoples and their craft and perhaps their worlds. So I think this gets into a bigger national security and global security issue, is that we're going to have to come together as a whole world and have a global treaty to keep these weapons and these technologies free of weapons against each other and against in space. And we cannot, put any of these weapons or allow any of them in space that are being used this way, either against each other or against these civilizations. One of the problems with all the space treaties is that they leave out one key ingredient. And I understand there's a treaty that's been verbally agreed to by China, Russia, and 40 other countries to ban and keep all of those weapons off of craft and out of space, and that those other countries are ready to sign it. I strongly recommend the United States sign it, because we cannot act as if we're operating in a vacuum. I've always said we're going out into space and doing these things, not calculating into this the fact that we're not alone. And the idea, people just sort of think, well, we're the only game in town in the whole cosmos. Well, we're not. And we're sort of the younger brothers and sisters coming along technologically, but we cannot allow an unappointed, unsupervised, illegal operation to continue to endanger the Earth and engage in these kinds of ridiculous operations. So that requires us beginning to think through what is the global response, both in terms of us working together as humans and humanity, but also what is our response to these visitors. So in 1990, 35 years ago, I started a program called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. You can look at the movie by the same title. It's for free to see on a number of sites. The point is that movie describes the program of humans coming together as sort of citizens, ambassadors, making peaceful contact. Now, the guys that are coming forward from these covert programs, they really love that idea. And they love the idea that we take and pivot away from a confrontational stance to a peaceful dialogue and open, peaceful contact. And that we go from using these amazing technologies in a way that harms and kills, however covertly, to something that would generate, quote, free energy for the Earth and heal the Earth and the environment and eliminate poverty globally, and would be this great tide that would lift all of humanity up out of the condition we're in now. Because as you know from looking at the Lost Century, and I believe you can see that on Tubi and some other streaming places, it describes that we've lost 100 years of human evolution due to the sequestering and the secrecy of these advanced technologies, all the way back to the time of Nikola Tesla. So we need to play about 100 years catch up here. And we also need to do it on other levels in terms of human consciousness and our social evolution, so that we're no longer having to view everything we don't understand as an enemy to shoot at. And unfortunately, that is a fact. I remember sitting, and excuse my language here, but in Senator Barry Goldwater's living room back in the 90s. And he was the senior Arizona senator who ran against Lyndon Johnson in 1964 for president and was a very conservative Republican. And he knew of this subject just through contacts in the military, but he never had been read into it, even as a presidential candidate for the Republicans or as chairman of different committees over the years and a ranking member. He's a very senior senator. And he said he had been denied access to any of these programs. And when he asked about them, was actually threatened by a close friend of his, General Curtis LeMay, who had been chief of staff of the Air Force. And he was told, General LeMay said to Senator Goldwater, I don't even have access to those programs anymore. But, and you can't. And if you ask me about it again, I'll see you're court-martialed out of the Air Force Reserve, because Senator Goldwater was in the Air Force Reserve. But one of the conclusions that Senator Goldwater reached, he said, and this was back about 30 years ago, sitting at his home out in Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, that area. And he says, it was a goddamn mistake then. It's a goddamn mistake now that this was ever kept secret. So now, saying it ain't making it so. So I said, well, Senator, I absolutely agree with you, but what are we going to do about it? So that is, the evolution of this has been that once you start on a path, this secret, and then it diverts off of constitutional oversight, which is what happened. This group did this in the late 1950s, and it's been like that ever since. Then how do you fix that without it being absolutely scandalous and difficult? And so there's an inertia. Most people, when they realize what the truth is about this, they go, let's just leave this alone. Let's not shake the boat here, rock it too much. But now we've reached a point, environmentally, geopolitically, but also the threat of these technologies in the hands of the wrong people getting used more and more and more in an aggressive way, and in a way that could harm the interests of all of humanity. So I think there's a big wave of change happening. And I'll never forget, I think it was last year, or about a year and a half ago or so, and a gentleman who works with this covert group that's coming forward and defecting, he was driving me from one place to another in Southern California. And when he dropped me off at a place where I was going to stay, he turned to me, and it was very emotional. There's a special forces guy. He said, Dr. Greer, thank you for what you're doing for those of us stuck on the other side. What do you mean? He meant stuck in these illegal programs, but they want out. And they got in those programs not knowing that they were illegal. So let me frame this for people a little bit. Everyone says, well, the government's hiding this and that. Well, the government, like I said, knows very little about this matter because it's so compartmented, but it's compartmented under an illegal operation or a deep black program. The other part of it is that so many of the people in those programs are really genuinely patriotic, and they're genuinely courageous, wonderful people. But by the time they realized, and you have to get very high up in the program, very high up, to realize it's being run unconstitutionally and illegally, they're in there and they're had. It's like, they're made men, and there's not a path out for them without literally risking their lives. I'll just put that on the table. So we're trying to create a path out that's safe, that can transition out, but it's fraught. It is very dangerous. And they know that. And these are conversations I have privately with all of these people who are in that situation. But keep in mind, they're wonderful people. They're courageous. They're the best and the brightest. They really are. And they want to do the right thing now. And so I think we, the public, have to understand that. We have to not paint everyone involved with these programs with the same brush, because many, many, many of them are actually victims of having been in service or in a corporation, and they move up through the system. They're tested as to whether they'll keep secrets. And then they move into something that is very advanced technology, advanced operations dealing with non-human craft and all of this, UFOs, UAPs. And even then, initially, they think, well, the president knows, the Congress knows, it's classified, but it's under the correct oversight. Now, it's very difficult when they realize, oh my God, I'm inside a criminal operation, a criminal organization. Because how do you get out and live to tell the tale? Because they do face the potential of what are called wet works or targeted assassinations and killings. So, which of course we all do, me, myself included. But I think that, at this point, there's enough wanting to do this, and there's enough support for it within, let's say, covert structures that are wanting to pivot away from those, what are being called legacy, the old guard, into this new era. And we need to be kind and supportive and understanding to people who, by no fault of their own, found themselves trapped in a system, and they didn't know that they were in a program that was not legal. How would they? I mean, because if you understand the nature of a compartmented operation, you don't know if you're in one compartment and your best friend is in another. No one discloses it, and it's hermetically sealed, like a silo that's separate. I've sort of been a silo smasher for 34 years, going across silos and across various compartmented operations. As a civilian, I have no government association whatsoever. I'm totally a private person. But at the same time, because of that compartmentalization, they're not at a level where they know who the leadership and what's being done, who's being lied to in Congress or in the White House, what kind of machinations are going on at that very high level. Now, the weird and strange thing about my life is I started at that top. I started as a young doctor being asked to come in and brief a sitting director of the CIA who genuinely had been denied access, and the president, his president, Bill Clinton, had been denied access, and then subsequently threatened. But I don't want to go into that right now. We'll see what this team that comes forward says about that. I know the whole story, all of it, virtually all of it. But that was President Clinton, and he tried to fix this problem. He did, but he ran into a buzzsaw. Let's just put it that way. So I think that we have to have compassion even for that, because look, we all put our pants on one leg at a time, and it's daunting, and it's dangerous, and not everyone's got the stomach to do everything that needs to be done when your fortune and your life and everything's on the line. And that's, you're either cut out of that cloth or you're not. And when you're talking about the moneyed and privileged and political class, that's not a very common attribute. But amongst these special forces men and women, and the ones who moved up through the system who now want to come forward, they are made out of the right stuff and cut out of that cloth, and they're very courageous. So we need to honor them. And I think we need to respect the situation they found themselves in. Imagine going from a 19 or 20-year-old guy, right, in a special operations, running into this subject, and then eventually you rise up to where you're now middle-aged, and you're high enough up, and you realize at some point, oh, damn, this operation is completely illegal and unconstitutional operation. But at that point, how do you get out and live to tell about it? It's a very big problem. I'm trying to build some compassion in the public here for the conundrum we're in. We're all in. I'm in that too, because I hold information and knowledge and names and places, and I named it my dead man trigger. Something happens to me, it all comes out. It's my insurance policy, but that are disturbing, that I've never disclosed, and don't plan to. But I think that at the same time, we have to take that little example I gave you of these courageous men coming forward, multiply it through the system. And so there are a lot of very good people who, whether they're corporate or government or intelligence or whatever, or a hybrid of both. A knock is often both. Have someone who's intelligence, but they're also corporate. So they have non-official covers. You have media people who are actually knocks. I know who some of them are. They don't know I know, but I know. And so that becomes something where at a certain point, you do it for all the right reasons, but then you realize you're in a very bad and corrupt enterprise when it's too late. I want everyone to understand this. I know I'm dwelling on it a bit because there needs to be context of understanding how people got there, and they're humans. And there's some very misguided humans that have done some, frankly, very evil things, and they're like evil geniuses. At the same time, the vast majority of people, even in these aerospace companies and in these intelligence and military units dealing directly with this issue, the vast majority of them are fundamentally good people caught in a very bad system and situation, not of their making. They inherited it. This is why they like to call it the legacy programs. Now let's visualize those legacy programs transforming. The worst capabilities are put on a leash and supervised properly by people who want a peaceful world. And the technologies, not all of them, begin to come out. and we transform the world. So what we need to be able to do is give an exit ramp or out for those folks to then take that huge high-tech sword and turn it into a great high-tech plowshare that would create abundance and peace and a new world. And that's one of the reasons one of my favorite stories ever was when Colonel Corso, who had been involved with some of the technology transfer from studying the extraterrestrial craft from the 40s and 50s. And at one point, I think it was 1956, he was out at White Sands Missile Range where the first atomic bomb was detonated. And there have been all these ET craft zipping around. And at one point, he drove out because one came in on radar and went down out in a remote area of the range. And he drove out there in his Jeep, and there was a ET craft there. And it would be solid, and then it would dematerialize and look like a heat wave, like a mirage in the desert, and then rematerialize and dematerialize and rematerialize. Finally, it became stable, and an ET appeared outside of it. What happened is that the ET basically was saying, would you please stop targeting us? Because they were using the radar that had within it piggyback. This is what happened at Roswell, by the way. A early directional energy weapon that would hit these objects and they'd crash. I mean, there's this myth that somehow these ET objects go through interstellar space and interdimensional space and then can't navigate a thunderstorm in New Mexico. Well, this is ludicrous. They're targeted and have been ever since the 40s. And I know how they're doing it. I know what the technologies are. But in this case, the ET said, would you please stop doing it? And Colonel Corso, being a brash young Air Force guy, Colonel goes, what's in it for me? And the ET says, a new world, if you can take it. So I sort of feel like we're at this point in 2025 where we really have, it's a fork in the road. Do we want to take that new world, or do we want to stay on the path we're on now that is going to lead to more and more environmental destruction and worse? So I think that this is the point where we together, all of us, I'm sitting in my living room, my little fireside chat, where there's no fire, but maybe someday we'll have a fire, and say, what are we going to do now? We need to enter into this new phase of human history, and now all the elements are in place to do it. It just needs to be a peaceful transition and transformation. And I will tell you, having spoken very recently with the knock, who's coming forward, that is his aspiration. And he's doing this for all the good, best reasons. It was funny. I think I offended a reporter with the New York Post last week, because everyone always pivots to, how could this be kept secret? I said, well, it's been kept secret because the legacy media and the big media and a lot of the big podcasts, I won't name any right now, they answer to their moneyed masters, right? So let's say that you're someone who's a reporter and you come across this and you're either threatened or you're bribed. And you're going to take what? You're going to risk your life, or you're going to risk your position in that news entity, or you're going to agree to be sort of an agent to either kill the story or what have you. So through intimidation and corruption, the mainstream media has never covered this. And I think the other part of it is that reporters, I've been dealing with the media. Like I was on Larry King Live's special back in 1994, over 30 years ago. They want very simple narratives. They want very teleologic, straight line stories. And this one isn't. This is unbelievably complex, Byzantine, nuanced. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of research to unpack it. So it doesn't lend itself to the soundbite and sort of headline thing. It would take the best investigative reporting team in the world to unpack 1% of this, to be honest with you. And that has never happened. So, and when it has started to happen, they're threatened. Now, let me give you an example. People say, well, what do you mean? It's kind of abstract what I'm saying. Years ago in the 1990s, I was at a place in New York where there were a bunch of, very senior New York socialites and people there. And I think the wife of the UN Secretary General was at that meeting, and some other people. And there was a guy named Bob Schwartz, and Robert Schwartz, who was on the board of Time Life, had been on the board of Time Life media network, which became AOL Time Warner and all that. And he had been very good friends with Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes, CBS. And Mike Wallace was the premier investigative reporter, probably you could argue of all times. And he told me this. Now, Bob Schwartz was friends with Mike, and he said, the reason Mike Wallace became so depressed to the point of being suicidal was because he had found out about this UFO issue, had gotten some documents and information, and wanted to run with it at 60 Minutes. The people in the corporate C-suite at CBS, which at that time was owned by Westinghouse, I believe, which was a big defense contractor, said, oh, no, you're not. And they forbade him from doing the study. And that's why some years later, he was on Larry King Live, a show I had been on, where he said, he became very depressed because he realized his whole career had been a fraud and that he was a fraud. And Larry King didn't understand that. And it was because he was a man of conscience, but was not allowed to tell the biggest story in the history of the human species. And that is a true story. Now, when Bob Schwartz told me that, the way he ended the conversation, I remember we're in this, I'm there sort of doing what they call a salon where a lot of, high level financial and social and political people gather, and someone comes into a dinner party at a home and shares what they know. And so it had to be shortened, but he said, let me tell you, the bottom line of this is the fourth estate, the media, have become scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king. And the right hand of the king was this vast military industrial financial complex that Eisenhower warned about when he left office just before President Kennedy was sworn in. So he said, basically, on certain stories, there is no free press. And now this was a very senior media guy, and I'm very young. I mean, I'm in my 30s, I guess, or maybe I was not quite 40. And I'm there with this titan, corporate media, and he's explaining how this works. So now extrapolate that across the media spectrum. Even big podcasts that I know of, when they've wanted to have the whole story of this on, they say, well, if you want to get this huge amount from this network to have your podcast sponsored, you can't tell this story. You can tell part of it. You can tell the disinformation part of it. And by the way, if it's in the mainstream media, it is almost always a little bit of truth and 9 parts fiction or disinformation. Now, what's the point of the disinformation? It's to gaslight the political leaders as well as the public and the media about what the actual truth is. So they always want people, they will open the door to you if you're willing to say the UFOs are a threat to the national security and we need more money for the military industrial complex. Now, I'm making this very simple. But if your narrative turns that direction, every door opens. Why? Because the powers that be that control the big financial entities and the vertically and horizontally integrated media, that's the story they want to hear, right? That's the approved narrative. Now, if you have a narrative counter to that, they don't want to hear it. What is that? The saying by the famous feminist Gloria Steinem, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. So, so I think that's another part of this is that I always flash on Jack Nicholson, A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth. Everyone says they want to know the truth until they hear the truth, and then they go, I don't want to hear this anymore, right? So I think that's part of the problem. That's human nature. And I was warned in 1990 or 91 by a CIA operative who said, if you tell the truth about this, the truth is so bizarre, it's all true, but it will discredit itself. It'll discredit you and it'll discredit itself, because the truth is so outrageous of what's actually happened, what the technologies are, how we have hoaxed the alien threat through propaganda and psychological warfare operations, psyops. And this guy knew all that. And I thought, at the time, I thought he had lost his mind. I said, I don't know what he's talking about. I'm a young, emergency doctor. I'm going, yeah, whatever, bro. But then I learned over the years, it didn't take long, within 2 years, that the man, every word he said was true. So, that's kind of the way it happens. And it is sort of a future shock effect. This information coming out, it is a bit of a shock to the system, to the conventional people. I think we have to be compassionate with that too. And I've had to be very patient, whether it be with people in Congress or leaders around the world or military people, and give them the information that they're ready and able to digest and understand. Because, you can't go from 1 and 1 is 2, learning math, to quantitative analysis and calculus, advanced calculus. So it's a process, and that's why we need to start this. That's why I started all these documentary films, and thank all of you who've helped crowdfund them. We need to do another one, don't we, Michael? And we need to do one that really catches all this up now that this is coming forward and coming to a head. Well, I think we have to be very forward-looking, both in terms of the promise of this moment, but the risks. And the risks are the very powerful interests that don't want the full story out, that want us to take a aggressive, hostile stance towards non-human life and intelligence and what have you. They may not go quietly, right? And that is the risk here. The big risk is that they don't, and they're holding all the technological cards. Now, keep in mind. Now, let me, because I know we've been going on here for, I don't know, an hour or hour and a half. But I want to share this story because it's circulated all over the internet. I found it hilarious. It's called the Wilson memo. I was asked to brief when I was going to be up there anyway, the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson, and is known as J2, head of intelligence Joint Staff. So prior to the brief meeting with him at the Pentagon, I had sent some information up through contacts, my POC, point of contact to him, that had some documents, a couple that had not been declassified, that because these programs are illegal, we have declared all those documents open source and all the whistleblower testimony open source. Just a little note here to whistleblowers listening. You're under no obligation from your non-disclosure agreements because you were signed it under an operation that was unconstitutional and illegal. Therefore, it has no force of law. That's the foundation of the Disclosure Project. Nobody quite understands this. The constitutional lawyers will, because that's how I came about this theory and ran it by some constitutional attorneys, both left and right, who said, yes, that's absolutely true. If the program itself is an illegal program, it can't then enforce national security law around it. So it's basically, they've outed themselves as an open source entity by going off the constitutional boundaries and operating illegally and lying to the president, lying to Congress. Anyway, so this gentleman had a keen interest in this issue. And so I gave Admiral Wilson in advance some materials. Through that and through him starting to know where to look. And this is what I've been doing with Senate Intelligence and Armed Services and other committees recently. He hit pay dirt. He contacted an office that was directly related to this. And when he called them, what I heard, what was relayed to me, is that he said, look, I'm Admiral Wilson. I'm head of J2, head of Intelligence Joint Staff. And they say, yes, sir, we know who you are. And he says, well, I want to be read into, which is military speak for briefed on this subject, UFOs and UAPs. And back then it was just called UFOs. And he said, and they said, sir, you don't have a need to know. And he said, God damn it, how can I not have a need to know? I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They said, sir, we will not discuss this with you. And they hung up, blocked him. As he began to push further, he was threatened, and he was threatened with being demoted. Take a star off your lapel. So when you retire, it's a big pay cut. So he backed off of it. So by the time I get to his office, now remember, this is supposed to be a 45-minute stand-up briefing that I'm doing for the head of intelligence joint staff. And it's hard to believe, it was almost 38 years ago in April, because it was April 97. And, you know, he was, of course, nonplussed. I had with me, as a courtesy, I brought astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was very interested in this. And I had one of Eisenhower's young aides in the White House who knew about how Eisenhower was being denied access, Stephen Lubkin, who was an attorney. But as a young man, he was in the Army Signal Corps. And then my assistant and the man, the Navy guy who set up the meeting. And so that's who was there, but I was conducting it, and he kept canceling appointments because it went on and on past the time, because he was very keen on it. At the end of it, now this is what's sort of astonishing. Now here you have the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and at the end of it, I said, look, we need your help to get these programs that are being run illegally, because he had confirmed that at that point, under control. He says, well, Dr. Greer, what do I do? I have learned that there are aircraft that are human that can do circles. And that's what he did. He did like this, circles around our B-2 stealth bombers, which is the best thing I know about. So he said, it's point, set, match. It's checkmate. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to take on an entity like that. And he said, so I'm out. I'm out. So that's how the meeting ended. That's a true story. Now, there's all kinds of mythology around all of this. But since I was the briefer, you know, I can say this with some authority. I was the one there. But, you know, I think you take that example, everyone listening, multiply that through the White House, the president, the Senate Intelligence Committee, now extrapolate it to the United Kingdom and the heads of state there, Canada, other countries that I've been to. That is the problem globally. It is not just the United States. So this sort of super secret, parallel secret government entity that Senator Inouye, from Hawaii, said back in during Iran-Contra, he said there exists a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's free from the law and above the law itself. I'm almost quoting word for word. You can go look at this video. And that is 100% true. And he subsequently confirmed to a young intern who's now helped us as an attorney that was especially true on the UFO issue. So, and that was during Iran-Contra. I mean, that was what, in the 80s or something, 40 years ago. So I think that this is the problem. And I ran into the same thing with this wonderful, very interesting man who was, this was after I briefed Admiral Wilson, and he was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the top military intelligence agency in the Pentagon that's over all other military intelligence operations. So it's the military version of the director of the CIA. So this is a director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it was General Patrick Hughes, a 3-star general. And he asked the same thing as a couple of years later, and he asked me to come in and brief him in a briefing in his conference room at the Pentagon. And he had the same thing happen. He had been denied access. He had been blown off, ridiculed. Now, what's ironic, I had whistleblowers in the DIA working under him who were read into compartments, but that never made its way up to the top. There were gatekeepers that would block it so that the old man, as they called him, wouldn't know. Now, people say, well, why would that, how can that happen? Well, it's because the people in those compartments stay in those compartments, and the people who, if you know about this issue and you're at that level of government, it's because they know that you will play ball with the secrecy. That's your sole criteria. Will you go along with this rather criminal and frightening level of secrecy or not? If the answer is yes, they'll let you come up. So there have been some CI directors who've known about this, like George H.W. Bush and Bill Colby and Richard Helms. There are others who haven't. There have been some presidents who know a little bit, but had no control over it. Some who were told virtually nothing. There are some senators and members of the House who have been read in, others who haven't. The ones who have are the ones who are willing to go along with that agenda. And the ones who aren't, no matter how high your rank, doesn't matter how high, you can be the president of the United States, you're not going to be told the truth because they don't want you to know if you're not willing to go along with that agenda, the secret agenda. So that's just the truth. I'm telling you the full truth about how it works, the structure of that organization. Now, that dysfunction started in about 1957, 8, 9, late Eisenhower term. It has never been fixed. That's what we're in the process of repairing. It's fixing that big problem. Ironically, I was 3, 4 years old when it happened. I was born in 1955, so I'll be 70 this year. And it's just one of these things where it's way dangerous, incredibly dangerous for something like that to remain operating out of control. And that is how you end up in the situation we're in now. So there will be a lot of people, both in the UFO subculture, let's call it, as well as in covert programs that are going to take it and spin it. That's what's always happened. And they're going to try to spin it in directions that fit the narrative that they want to advance. One of my concerns, I'll be very blunt, is that as soon as this gentleman and his guys decided to unmask themselves, in other words, come forward named, which was not the original plan. The original plan was to hand over all the a lot of the evidence of these operations, the downing of the craft, the man-made ones to me, and I'd get it out. They decided to come out publicly. Well, as soon as that decision was made and they put it on a timeline, i.e. before the inauguration of the next president, which is where we are, all the drones stuff started. It was sort of a psyop. And, you know, whether they're Chinese or whatever, the button to hit go on that was related to this organization wanting to create the specter of a threat. And then a number of other ridiculous things happened where, for example, the suicide bomber who blew up the Tesla truck at the Trump building on New Year's Day, he wrote a manifesto referring to gravitic propulsion systems, meaning anti-gravity, all the stuff this group is going to bring out. And so everyone thinks that that guy was one of our guys. He's not. He had no relation. In fact, no one in my network even knew had ever heard his name. But why did that happen? It appeared to be a psyop or something to create a tainted version of this. Now, we haven't all the details on it yet. We're investigating it. But it's not everything that meets the eye on that weird event. Same thing with all these drones and this weird fog stuff. There are people all over the internet saying that's an alien invasion starting. Well, all that started literally right after, around the time my meeting with the NOC, and who said, I'm going to come out publicly now. I'm going to actually unmask myself. And I'm going to be coming out with name, rank, serial number. That's a game changer. And particularly someone at that level with other people and representing information from 6 different black sites. And I've only been over the 2. So I know of the others. But the point I'm making here is that there is a risk here. And the public, this is why I'm doing this podcast. So as whatever chicanery unfolds, here's where you need to listen. And I don't want to overstate my position. But if you want to know what's really going on, tune into this podcast, because I will not varnish the truth. It'll be the truth, the whole truth as I know it. It'll be direct. I am not a politician. I am not looking for a job. I am not looking for money, and I'm not looking for a political position. I'm going to tell you the truth no matter what. So this is why people need to understand that's my mission. That's my purpose. And I'm wired into enough of this, as you can tell by now, that I'll be able to speak with authority. So, but there will be a cacophony, a chorus, and chaotic attempts to do this. And then the other big risk is that what happened on New Year's Day with that Cybertruck explosion, or what's been happening with the drones, they could put that on steroids. They could launch that into even worse events, which we hope won't happen. But as an emergency doctor, here's the deal. You know, you have a multi-system trauma coming in, right? With 10 victims. You hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. You plan for absolutely the worst on all that. So my ethos here is to hope for the best, to be positive, but plan for the worst. And so I think that I'm going to be very vigilant to watch what's going on, what kind of spin is put on this by both the UFO subculture and the media, but what actions start to be taken by this corrupt organization, which is not yet under control. This is going to be, unfortunately, he may not know this yet, although I hope he does by now, that the incoming president's biggest task is going to be this. Much bigger than the Russia or China problem, by far, or the Mideast, by an orders of magnitude, couple of orders of magnitude. Now, that's not quite appreciated. I have met with some senior people in the incoming administration, and I'm not going to talk about those meetings. We've been doing it very intensively over the last couple of months, but it's a process, but that process needs to quicken and step up the pace, because the law enforcement end of this that has not yet been stood up and funded properly needs to get stood up on day one, which of course is Monday. But we'll see. I'm just hoping in the meanwhile that with enough of the information coming out, that it would become obvious to more and more people in the media and the public if some false flag operations continue. But I can tell you that the flurry of drone events and some of these other things that have happened are not a particularly good prognostic indicator, as we'd say in medicine, that organization is just going to go quietly. This is why I think that it would behoove the incoming president and Congress, as well as leaders elsewhere around the world, to come together and figure out a pathway out, including this amnesty concept, that people who need to come forward can do so safely without recriminations and liabilities. I will tell you that there's the former chairman of a Fortune 50 corporation who's reached out to me, but he's not only afraid of legal problems, but he's also afraid for the safety of his children and grandchildren. So physical safety. So there's a lot of mechanisms that need to be put in place that we've been advising literally since the Clinton administration.